Hello everyone, my name is Borax and I've been on a mission to play and rate every single champion in the support role. Today we'll be looking at Gangplank, and the reasons why he could work as a support include a passive which periodically grants his first basic attack on a target a true damage burn, as well as granting him bonus movement speed. The cooldown for this gets reset whenever a powder keg explodes, and he also gets granted the movement speed. His Q, which is a mid-range poke, which applies on hits. A W, which cleanses all crowd control and heals him. An E, which spawns barrels that slow enemies hit by it by 40% at rank 1, scaling up to 80% at max rank, while also ignoring 40% of the enemy's armor and having the possibility to critically strike. Finally, he has his ultimate, which is a large AoE and global ability that slows enemies by 30% for 0.5 seconds while dealing magic damage to them. Even though he is an off-meta support pick for sure, how viable could he be? Well, let's find out together, as I rate Gangplank, the Saltwater Scourge, on his ability to be played in the support role. In the early game, I like to rate a support's ability to invade lane and roam. The biggest downside of Gangplank's support is his lack of hard CC, so invading on him would be stupid. Of course, I ignored all common sense most games, and ran at the enemies looking for opportunities to proc my first strike and spectral sickle for cheeky early gold. I also would recommend slamming down an early ward, as I like recalling before the first wave to purchase an early red trinket, as that will be important for the laning phase. Now, I have commonly been talking about support's ability to protect against invades, and while that didn't come up, for some reason enemy bot lanes decided that they wanted to cheese my lane, which didn't really work out for them, because our jungler used the OP ability known as their eyes to punish those attempts. For invading, I will give Gangplank a F rating. His damage in an early fight isn't too bad thanks to his passive and Q, but if you ever get caught out, you'll just wind up dead, and the same goes for your teammates as you can't really save them. Now let's talk about laning, where I like to judge a champion based on 3 categories: poking, peeling, and all-inning. At level 1, I'm looking for plenty of opportunities to be as annoying as possible on GP, fighting every possible angle that I can to land a Q on the opponent, then quickly running away. Now I'm doing this to either proc Comet, which does a decent amount of damage early on, or better yet First Strike, which can grant GP gold and scales better later on. The problem with First Strike, though, is enemy bot laners hitting you first, which causes the rune to go on cooldown, and it can be rather tilting. Now at level 2, you gain access to a lot more poke potential with your barrels. Remember when I said that red trinket would be an important part of your laning phase? Well, that's because you want to be having early brush control, so you can sit there with a barrel and wait for an enemy to come close by, so you can pop them with a double barrel or a triple barrel. And with First Strike, the damage isn't bad at all. A downside of his poke is how long the cooldown of his barrels are early on, so if you do ever miss them, or if the enemy kills the barrel before you can, then that does really suck. For poking, I will give GP an A+. The damage is very noticeable, especially once you get an early sheen after first back thanks to the rune Futures Market. If you somehow find yourself with a lead, the amount of damage you will be dealing is phenomenal, but the downside of playing GP is finding that lead without falling behind. As GP support, you want to try and keep the opponents under their own tower so that you have the minion advantage and you can harass them with barrels, but the downside of this is the possibility of getting ganked. So, how does Gangplank fare when it comes to peeling? Well, a weakness of GP is peeling for others, as the only thing he can provide for his ally is a solid slow if he can set up his barrels. The problem with that is you might not have any to set up if you use them to poke, or if the enemies land a skill shot or commit a flash, the barrel might not be ready to proc in time as the DK ticker early game is rather slow. Now a strength of Gangplank is how great he is at peeling for himself, and because he is a really off-meta pick, people will be desperate to try and punish you for choosing this champion, completely forgetting the fact that you have Cleanse as a basic ability on your W that when used properly can get you out of a sticky situation rather easily. This ability can be a bit buggy though, especially if your ping isn't the lowest, so if you think you might get one shot, it might be better to use it earlier than later. For peeling, I will give Gangplank Support a B+ rating. If the enemies try to kill you instead of your ADC, they will find out just how slippery GP can be, as I haven't even mentioned his passive that can give him a burst of movement speed to further help him to run away. The problem with GP's peel comes in when the enemies get an engage off on your ADC, as you can't do that much to help him out besides using exhaust and dishing out damage. But if you are playing GP support properly and are forcing the opponents under their tower with lower HP than yourself, then the enemy bot lane will struggle to engage onto your ADC without dying in return, as GP is solid when it comes to all-ending in lane, like this Nami and Samira found out the hard way. If you have that sheen from Futures Market, then GP will be doing a lot more damage than ADCs after their first back, with the procs from the item combined with his low cooldown Q and bonus damage from his passive as well. But what about before sheen? Does GP have any kill presence? Yes. Yes, he does. With his W being able to ignore one important spell from the enemy's support early on, and a proper exhaust usage, you can bait foes in, then beat them down with autos and Qs, securing a quick and easy second blood. I just love playing off-meta supports, because the advantage you have over people who don't face your champion often is quite visible. Gangplank is particularly unique, as he is pretty OP in all honesty, as they just keep buffing him repeatedly, even though he hasn't been in a bad state. And while Lee Sin Taric is probably one of the most played bot lanes historically, I bet they were quite surprised to find themselves dying to this off-meta pick. For all inning, I will give Gangplank a C+. The damage is not a problem one bit, and in fact it's rather ridiculous if you can brawl people down. But Gangplank does struggle a bit to force the issue when it comes to things like gank setups, as it can be rather difficult to land his only CC, the barrel slow, in such a pivotal moment, as the enemies can clearly see that it's coming in and can just right click away. Plus, if the enemy is hard pushing into your lane and are capable of being ganked, then it means you aren't poking them properly, as, once again, you want to try and force them under tower and applying pressure on them to last hit, while also trying to avoid your barrel poke. Now that we've talked about Gangplank's laning prowess, let's rate the matchups that he might have to face. GP is quite interesting, as I think his bad matchups are super awful, and his good matchups are surprisingly great. The hardest matchups are the poke supports you will come across, who can both destroy your barrels with autos and help establish bush control for their ADC, which makes GP rather useless. They also can easily place your first strike on cooldown, which is both lame and frustrating. Then we have a lot of heavy engaged supports who have multiple CC tools to potentially overwhelm your W ability, or worse yet, they can go in on your ADC and kill them. Also, some of these champions have knockups which can't be cleansed. I will say though, they can't destroy your barrels from afar, so poking the enemy ADC isn't too hard. So if you play safe early levels and find a moment to get a back off to get that sheen, then you can find opportunities to bully them in lane. But if you do ever fall behind, then it's probably game over. I'd say Swain and Thresh are a 50-50 lane, as their autos aren't the longest, so they can struggle a tad to kill your barrels, and their main CC can be cleansed easily with your oranges. They do still have the opportunity to mess up your ADC though, so watch out. Champions I think Gangplank Support does quite well into are most of the enchanters, as they usually have one form of CC that can be cleansed by your W, and you can establish brush control if you help your ADC push, even committing a barrel to do so if you feel the need. If you can get these champions under their tower, then it's so much fun playing the little minigame of who can proc the barrel faster. Champions that GP can really dominate are the melee supports who can't kill your barrels and only have one CC ability that GP can cleanse. The enemy ADC will be super frustrated getting zoned by GP barrels as they try to farm, because if they do get hit by one, it's like a quarter of their HP gone, and GP can just run away with no response. Finally, we have a bunch of champions in the who plays these guys even, as I'm waiting to see people pick these characters in my games. GP does well into most ADCs honestly, but there are a few tricky matchups. Number 1 has to be Caitlyn because of her long range and ability to push the wave. Number 2 then is probably Ezreal, as he can hit you from afar while arcane shifting out of your barrels and ultimate. The ADCs GP does best into are those with low mobility or range, as later on into the game, his ultimate is very punishing for them to play against, as it will be permaslowed while either trying to enter a fight or attempting to exit one. Now let's talk about ADCs you want to pair Gangplank with, and the answer is ADCs that are really lane dominant, so that you can get that early push off and keep the enemies under their tower. Champions like Caitlyn, Lucian, Xayah, and Tristana come to mind, but I might be wrong as the ADC role is so boring, and I honestly don't know the most about it. I do know, however, that in the hypothetical case that your ADC is a useless bonobo, that you might want to consider roaming from time to time, so let's talk about that. The reason why I played GP as a support at all was because I was excited for his ability to roam. You might have noticed I didn't mention his ultimate in laning phase, and while it is admittedly decent at helping him peel, or it can be used to secure a 2v2 kill, I'd much rather save it for close fights outside of my own lane, as being able to influence those can be very impactful during the game. That's true even if you do accidentally steal a guaranteed kill, as it is more gold overall for your team, and will give you a juicy ultimate hunter stack to help you help out getting other kills for your team. Funnily enough, I actually ended up leaving my lane quite frequently to help my teams out with plays, and as long as you are responding, GP has a fair amount of range to influence a fight with his ulti and barrels. But he isn't the best at initiating plays, as if you get caught out by the enemy mid laner or jungler, you don't really have an escape tool, and if you do want to try and gank, you don't have that hard CC to force the issue. For roaming, I will give Gangplank a S- rating. While the cooldown is long, if his ultimate is up, then it is a factor that the enemy does have to be wary of all the time when they're looking to try and make a 50-50 play, as the damage and slow it provides is formidable. let's give Gangplank a rating for his ability to support in the early game, which will slot at an A. I know, I'm as confused as you are. But as long as he has a favorable matchup in lane, he does have a major impact, especially with an early Sheen giving him access to a lot more damage than he has any right to possess. In other lanes, GP can't just bully you 24/7 as he has to focus on farming, but with that responsibility out the window in the support role, then anyone who has played against a GP knows just how annoying he can be. But while he is a dominating lane presence, even in the support role, how does he fare when it comes to the
"Neither the flames nor the depths could claim me"?
In the late game, responsibilities of a support I like to rate include their ability to get picks and to team fight. The way I think you should play GP support in the mid to late game is standing next to your ADC as they farm the mid waves as you maintain vision control for them. What's nice about Gangplank in general though is he can impact the rest of the map even while being AFK because of his ultimate ability. See a play developing somewhere? Drop your ulti and enjoy the free assist gold. Another way you can try and get picks as GP is by sitting in a bush that isn't warded with a barrel and waiting for the enemy to pass by. If you can land a barrel combo on them, then hopefully your team can follow up with that burst of damage you will do, as well as the immense slow you provide. For getting picks, I will give GP support a B- rating. If he has his ultimate up, he's really great at helping your team get a pick. But if it's on cooldown, he kinda sucks at it, as GP just running towards you doesn't do too much and people can just back away. Now let's talk about team fighting, where support's responsibilities include engaging, peeling, and sometimes dealing damage. Believe it or not, but Gangplank's best engage tool is once again his ultimate ability. Quite the common theme we are seeing here. But if your team is wanting to get the play started, GP ult is a great way to slow and harass opponents when they're grouped up around objectives or when you are sieging down the enemy's base. The slow that the ulti provides is a great way for you to try and land a barrel combo on top of the opponent, and if you can do all that onto the enemy squishies, it's amazing. What is not amazing is the fact that GP has no hard CC or any kind of engage tool outside of his long cooldown ultimate and really unreliable barrels, so I'll give him a C+ for his ability to engage. The ultimate is amazing, but if you used it somewhere else, then GP is almost useless as an engage source unless he is able to hit a nasty barrel combo, and that is much easier said than done. Part of peeling can be healing and shielding your allies, and that is something GP cannot do one bit. But another part of peeling is running interference, and that's something GP can do. His barrels can zone people away from your team, but it's not effective if the enemy team has a big tank or bruiser who can tank the barrel damage from GP and then run down either yourself or your ADC. Also, assassins are way too fast in dishing out their damage, so if they get a successful flank off, the only thing you can do is press exhaust and pray. GP ult is once again really nice in helping his team peel because of the large, long-lasting AoE slow, but despite that, I'm going to give GP a D+ rating here. If the enemy really wants to go in, there's little GP can do to stop them. But if they do go in, they do have to be wary of the damage that GP can dish out, and it is a ton even in the support role. With first strike and a full crit build, the amount of burst that GP can do in a short period of time is probably the most in the entire support role, if you have a lead. And for that reason, I'll give him a S- rating here. I'd put it higher if landing barrels was easier, or if he wasn't so item reliant, but those two factors are keeping him from being at the very top of the damage charts. Before we rate Gangplank's overall ability to support, let's take a look at the runes and items that I would recommend. Gangplank Support has been one of the most delightful things I've ever played, and it honestly might be because of the rune First Strike. This rune is another reason why brush control is so important, because you want to be hiding in there so that enemies can't put it on cooldown as easily. But the 10% bonus damage and gold you can get from hitting a barrel chain feels so satisfying, and it honestly scales pretty well into the late game. For the rest of the tree, I take even more greedy runes with magical footwear, allowing you to bypass boots for a bit to focus on getting items. I also take Futures Market to get those items even faster, and Cosmic Insight to lower your flash and exhaust cooldowns. Secondarily, I took Zombie Ward to help you establish more vision, and Ultimate Hunter because I just love Gangplank ulti so much. I will say though, Treasure Hunter is a very intriguing choice because you can get the stacks more easily than other champions thanks to your ulti, and while 550 gold is pretty meh, for GP in the support role it is rather nice, as it could mean 15% more crit. Now let's talk about items. For your gold income item, Spectral Sickle is the way to go, as you can proc it with barrels, as well as your parlay, and it gives him more damage early on. And while yes, I have already mentioned it 1,000 times, your first item should always be Sheen after your first back, and it should be easily affordable thanks to your Futures Market. In top lane, GPs will often turn that Sheen into a Divine Sunderer or a Triforce, as it helps them survive against other top laners, but not only are they rather expensive items, but GP support is just a bush gremlin, hoping to proc his barrels against enemy enchanters and ADCs, which Essence Reaver will be more than happy in helping you accomplish that goal. If you have this item and somehow get a random crit with first strike on a barrel, then the enemy bot lane just straight up loses, and it's hilarious to see. By now you should have your boots for magical footwear, and I usually ended up upgrading them into Ionian Boots of Lucidity for more CDR, which GP does love to have. The second item you want to build towards usually, especially if the enemy team has a lot of healing, is Mortal Reminder, as it is a relatively cheap option and grants GP movement speed and more crit, which he loves. After the buffs, it's also easier to proc the enhanced Grievous wounds, as you can do it instantly with an auto attack and a parlay. The third item I usually purchased was the traditional support item known as Infinity Edge, because if you can somehow afford this item, that means you're doing quite well in the game and it really takes crit GP's damage to another level. By now, if the game is somehow not over, I'd recommend going for more crit cloaks, because if you can get that random crit barrel off, it doesn't matter if you are a support, it does a lot of damage. Also, 2 more crit cloaks will only cost you 1200 gold, while giving your full build 90% crit. I did also try going for a more utility-based lethality build with Umbral Glaive, Serpent's Fane, and a Chempunk Chainsword, and while it is also fun in its own way, I think having the threat of crit GP from the support is even more of a delight, so that's what I stuck with. Also, in terms of what GP ultimate upgrade you should get first, well, it sadly doesn't matter, because with this playstyle, you never get any Silver Serpents. Now you might have noticed that I haven't recommended any mythic items, and that's because you can't really use the support ones that effectively, and the other ones are way too expensive for the support role. In the end, you'd rather have more early power from items that are cost effective. I did also try playing AP Gangplank in the support role, as I'll admit I used to do it all the time in ARAM, and while I think it's really fun proccing Lichbane with your barrels, the item is way too expensive for how trash it is, and that was of course the only GP game I ended up losing. But that might be more because it was against a Senna Caitlyn, which is impossible to play against. Now that we've talked about the runes and items, let's give Gangplank an overall rating for his ability to support, which will slot at a B. I only lost one game on Gangplank support, and that was my AP attempt on the PBE, but even though I was kind of popping off during laning phase, he doesn't have the utility that you would like later on in the game from the support role. Also, he plays a lot like a traditional mage poke champion, but his cooldowns are a lot longer and overall range is shorter than theirs, meaning he isn't as reliable as they are. That being said, he has one of the few global abilities in the entire game, which does mean he can provide a sudden impact on another lane, which enemies might not be expecting, and it can be very impactful. Would I recommend you play Gangplank support? Absolutely. This might be my favorite off-meta pick so far, that, while it isn't the best clearly, it's so much fun. If you enjoy playing Gangplank, but don't enjoy playing top or mid, then I highly suggest you give him a try in the support role. Rush that early Sheen, and have fun poking the enemies down. He does best with comps that want to play a 1-3-1, as he can help clear waves in the mid lane and impact the side lanes with his global ultimate. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would leave it a like, that would be amazing. And if you would consider subscribing, that would make my day. Again, thanks for watching, and I want to wish you good luck and have fun if you're playing Gangplank support yourself. You will probably need it.